Hello and welcome to this Astranti Top 10 Most Likely Unseen Issues for the November 2021 and February 2022 Strategic Case Study Exam on video game developer Pixlwizz. I've got 10 issues that I'm going to run through, but before I begin, I'm just going to introduce this video by looking at my basis for my choices here and also how you can prepare for questions in the exam. So we'll start by looking at why I've come up with these top 10 most likely unseen issues. The first reason is the focus in the pre-scene. For example, if there's something with a lot of space devoted to a particular issue, it's more likely that it's going to come up as a question. Why would the examiner put this much information in if it wasn't going to be important? And also the degree of importance that questions generally are given by the examiner. So certain questions such as ethics, certain questions such as audit, etc. are considered very important by the examiner and wants to test students on them, so they're more likely to be in. Also, the importance of something to the strategy of the organization. For example, the importance in the SWOT, when you think about the strengths and the weaknesses of the organization. The strength of the organization very much is the quality of the games that it produces and the value of the reputation of the organization, etc. And also how important the directors are likely to find something. Maintaining quality, for example, is going to be very much something the directors value. And my own experience as well. I've taught this particular case study for many years. The strategic case study, seen many past papers, etc. So I have an idea of the kinds of questions that have come up in previous exams, the typical issues that generally come up time and time again, and also based on how easy it is to examine certain topics from the core activities are more easy to examine than others. It's very easy for certain questions to be written that test a huge range of knowledge, so they're more likely to be put into the different variants. So that's why I've come up with these options, and before we begin, just give you an idea of how you can prepare for your exam using this information. So when we talk about the key models, we're going to go through some key theories that can be used to answer these questions, prepare some information based on that and based on the pre-scene, for example, pastel analysis, 5 forces analysis, all these sorts of things, adapt those for the pre-scene company. Also, make sure you sit mock exams. It's the best way you can prepare for the exam is to sit mocks, and make sure you sit them under timed conditions, because then you're getting the full exam experience. There's a lot of problems that students have with the case study exam, it being a written exam. They have problems with their planning, they have problems with their writing style, they have problems with their time management. All of these are best tested by sitting mock exams. Also, find relevant real-life examples. We do have the industry analysis video coming up in this series as well. We have got lots of real-life examples for you to use, and prepare some sample paragraphs based on how you would perhaps bring those up in your exam, so that you're not wasting time thinking about how you're going to bring them up in the actual exam. Also, learn some of the typical points, such as the advantages and disadvantages of certain strategies. If the company were to move into a new country, enter a new market, what are the advantages of doing that? What could potentially go wrong with doing that, etc. And finally, be prepared for which models you are going to use to support the issues as well. If it is an issue over entering a new market, then you might want to talk about ANSOFs, the relevant level of risk. You might want to talk about PESTEL and Porter's Diamond, the relevant cultural factors that are going to affect whether or not entering that market may be successful. So that's an introduction to this video. Now let's take a look at our first issue, issue number 10, and that is on funding. Now, why have I chosen funding as one of my top 10 most likely unseen issues? Well, it's a key F3 topic. It covers equity funding, raising money through the stock market, debt funding, cost of capital as well, and returns required by shareholders. And the reason why this is one of my likely issues is because it generally comes up every single time. It's very commonly examined, and cash might be needed to support very large investment projects. They have a lot of money in the bank, but a lot of that might be needed for working capital and to pay for liabilities should those liabilities fall due. But it's also very likely to come up because it's simply part of your role that CIMA has given as the SCS guide, as a senior manager working in the organization. And it may often feature as an add-on issue as part of other questions. It might be a strategy that you're analyzing, a new project, and a part of that is to discuss how it's going to be funded, how it's going to be financed. And funding generally comes up in some way, shape, or form every single time. So it's very likely that you're going to get a question on funding, or at least you're going to need to talk about funding with regards to new projects. So as I mentioned, it's very likely to be an add-on issue. It could be about getting perhaps a short-term loan, overdraft, etc. to pay for working capital, or calling in some assets to pay for some liabilities, etc. Or it could be a long-term funding requirement, such as investing in a very big, expensive new project or acquiring another organization. Some key points to bring up. The examiner said that they like students to mention content from the pre-scene, and this is a lot easier than people think. Often it can be just as simple as bringing up statistics from the pre-scene, just to show that you have read the pre-scene, you've understood the pre-scene, you understand the context of where you're answering the questions from. So for example, if there's a huge project that's going to require billions in investment, and we know we don't have billions in the bank, you need to mention that. Mention the figures from the pre-scene. Demonstrate that you know where we're coming from here, that we would have to raise additional finance for that, rather than just simply saying, yeah, that will be a good idea. Because at the 30th of December 2020, the company had $1,298,000,000 Western dollars in the bank. But some of that will be needed for working capital, for salaries. You've got over 5,000 staff members. And of course, you can't delay paying the salaries in the same way as you can perhaps push a supplier back, say we'll pay you for those supplies next month rather than this month. And the current liability is already very high at $1,140,000,000 Western dollars. So though that cash may be needed to pay off some of those liabilities. Hopefully, we won't actually have that many in liabilities, because over 700 million of that was in deferred revenue, which is as the result of basically accepting revenue for services that haven't been rendered yet. So essentially, in this industry, it's likely to be things like pre-orders. People pre-ordering a particular game, they're already paying for the game, but they haven't received it yet. But that is still a liability, because until we actually deliver on that, until we actually provide that game, it is not money that we have earned. It's unearned revenue at this point. We have the revenue, but if we do not deliver, we'll need to pay it back. So it's not 100% ours. It's not cash that's just freely available for us to spend at this point, because we may have to pay it back. Also, as part of a prudent financial strategy, you need to make sure that you're planning for instances of perhaps negative cash flows, where we haven't got that much money coming in this particular month because everyone's delaying for the Christmas rush or whatever it may be, yet we've still got salaries that have to be paid for. Other factors to consider with regards to raising funding is the debt funding is currently low, particularly for a tech company, 25.8% or 34.77%, depending on which method you have used, the long-term debt divided by equity or the long-term debt divided by long-term debt plus equity. No real reason why you need to use one or the other, as long as you always use the same one in your analysis. Because if you're comparing years or you're comparing companies using different methods for calculating the gearing, then it's going to skew the analysis. There are also tangible assets on the bank, the statement of financial position, 384 million Western dollars, and some of that may be used as security to raise debt against. But the assets were comparatively low compared to the revenue generated of the organization. We would perhaps expect that, given that it's very much an intellectual property, it's a services company, it's a lot more in intangibles than it is in physical assets. Relevant theory to use here, comparing debt and equity. Debt often a lot cheaper and quicker to raise, but of course it does have to be paid back, whereas equity dividends are not necessarily having to be paid, although the company currently does pay a huge portion of dividends. 89% of profit last year was paid back in dividends. And if you do borrow money, you need to make sure that you consider them as important stakeholders where they're going to sit on the Mendelow's matrix. Big shareholders often can be key players, particularly if they own sizable portions of the business, and lenders can sit in the keep satisfied category. Banks generally are very powerful, but they're not too interested in what you're doing as long as you're paying off your interest payments. And according to the Precinct, we have a very, very high interest cover, over 60 times of our operating profit, and therefore we would be able to potentially take on additional debt funding without it having a huge impact on our cash flow. Now on to issue 9, and that is auditing. And the reason why I've chosen auditing is, again, it's a very important topic. It's a key P3 topic. It ties in with governance, it ties in with ethics, stakeholder management, and also risk management, which is another important P3 topic, although it is different from risk management. And I mentioned this purely because this is something the examiner has said several times before, is that in their examiner reports, is that students sometimes confuse risk management with audit. They are two different things. Risk is all about identifying risks and putting controls in place. Audit is all about monitoring those controls to see that they are being adhered to. So for example, if there's a risk of someone stealing something from a shop, a risk management strategy might be to put a lock on the door or to put security cameras in. That's a risk management strategy. Audit's job is then to check that people are actually locking the door or that the security cameras are operating. That is the difference. I'm sure you're all aware of that, but just thought I would mention it as the examiner has specifically mentioned it. It's also a very important core activity. Control environment is one of the big core activities. It's a core activity all of its own. So 15 to 25% of marks are going to come from things related to audit, things related to governance, etc. The audit committee is also present in the Precinct. Does mention that there is an audit committee and their responsibility for internal audit is part of their role. And candidates are often poor in this area. It's one of the poorest performing core activities for candidates. So again, it's more likely for the examiner to want to test people on that because they don't want people to be poor in this area. So they want to keep making sure that people are tested on it so that people are getting better at it. So likely issues could be undertaking an audit into the various different controls that are in place or identifying internal control issues. Also discussing the link with the external auditor. The internal auditor ultimately needs to be making sure that there are links with the external audits, and they're very important for the accounts, for the shareholders, etc. as a listed organization. And also the risks involved in not auditing properly, that certain things might get leaked, certain games might get hacked by hackers, etc. How do we make sure we're controlling this? And also to make sure the quality of the games is good. There's good quality control before the game is released to the market, as that might impact our reputation. So key points to bring up here. There are lots of substantial risks in the Precinct. There's a lot of risks that we also brought up as well that weren't initially mentioned in the risk report, and with control systems in place that will need to be monitored, and yet there was no mention of internal audit. But there would be a need for effective internal audit. A company of this size, particularly given the image of the company as well, and to be quality, a tech company as well, it's an important part of governance, an important part of the greater thing of risk management, of which audit is different, but it's still tied with it. And relevant theory to bring up here, ultimately relating to the scope of audit, is about making sure that everyone is compliant, particularly in an industry like this where there might be legal liabilities, particularly for addiction and gambling, etc., with the microtransactions, making sure that everyone is complying with the legal requirements and environmental requirements of the industry. The audit must also ensure that the controls are providing value for money. And that's also part of audit itself needing to be a cost benefit. So for example, if you're spending 100,000 Western dollars on a control system that's basically preventing a risk that would cause 5,000 Western dollars of damage, it's not providing appropriate value for money. It would be more effective, cost effective, to just allow that risk to happen than it would be to put that 100,000 Western dollar control system in place. Also, when you're talking about the requirements for effective auditing, it needs to have effective leadership that's in control of what is happening, that knows what their responsibilities are, that knows how to coordinate the audit team. They must act ethically and with independence as well. So they must make sure that they're not thoroughly investigating a certain department just because that department is managed by someone that they really like, etc. They must act ethically, they must act objectively and independently. And also, management is not allowed to get in the way of audit as well. A manager can't say, well, okay, auditors come into the department, do all the reviews, etc., but then give the information to me and I'll pass on what I want to the directors. That's not how audit works. It has to be completely independent of management. And if you do have all those requirements and you do make sure the audit has that scope in place, then you will effectively audit the organization, effectively audit those controls, effectively make sure that everyone is complying, etc. And that will be beneficial for the organization in the long run to help improve the sustainability of it and to make sure that the quality is there, make sure the legal compliance is there, all of which is very, very important. And as I've already mentioned, audit, one of the big core activities and something that students often struggle with, and therefore it's very important that you're aware of that going into the exam, as it's likely that you may be tested on it. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed it and more importantly you have found it useful. Just going to take a moment to tell you about the courses that we produce here at Astranti for our case studies. And all of the products that you see here are available as standard as part of the course, but they are also available for purchase individually. We have the Exam Technique series, which is a study text and a video series, which looks at how to plan your answers, how to read the material and analyze the material effectively, and to manage your time effectively in the exam, which is incredibly important. Most people who fail the case study exam fail it because of poor exam technique. So that's a really important video series for you to watch to ensure that you've got that technique. Because there is a specific technique to sitting the case study exam, and all will be revealed in that video series. And do head over to the website for more information about it. We then have our theory revision series, which again is a study text and a video series, and that looks at the specific theories that are relevant to the case study, because a lot of the material from the E's, the P's, the F's won't appear in the case study. It's only specific topics that are frequently tested in the case study. So to save you from revising all the E's and all the F's and all the P's, we've created a more condensed revision series to refresh yourself of the knowledge that you'll need for the exam. We then have our pre-scene analysis series, which looks through the pre-scene page by page, bringing out the important points. In addition to that video series, there is also a video that looks at the top 10 most likely unseen issues, and also the strategic analysis video, which takes all the key models from the CIMA syllabus and applies them to the case. We then have our industry analysis pack, which is a large document that looks at the industry that the pre-scene is based on, looks at all the real companies that are actually operating in that actual industry in the real world, looks at how they market, what the suppliers are, what the key stakeholders are, how they operate, industry trends, and also a series of industry examples that you can use and reference in your exam. And we've got sample paragraphs to show you how you would use it in the exam, and that's a document. There's also an accompanying video with it. We have our mock exams, which are based on actual exams, but they feature the reference to the actual case, so they're on the actual case that you will sit the exam on. We've done our best to make them as close to the actual exams as possible, and you can actually sit those online in an online system that replicates the one that you'll use on the exam day. So you can really test yourself under exam conditions, and we provide marking and feedback for those mocks as well, where you'll get a tutor that will analyze your script and will give you a comprehensive document providing you with information not only on your actual script, as in whether you passed and failed and what you should have brought up and what you shouldn't have brought up, etc. But we'll also give you an appraisal on your technique as well, how to improve your exam technique. We then have our question packs, which is a series of shorter mock style questions based around the core activities. So if you find that you really struggle with certain parts of the CIMA syllabus, that will be a really good way for helping you. For example, if it's the core activity A's that you're always struggling with, or the B's that you're struggling with, you can look at the specific core activity A pack, which will give you questions based on those subjects. And then we have our masterclasses. We have 2 live all-day masterclasses, one at the start of the course and one at the end of the course. The one at the start of the course will give you all sorts of hints and tips on how to plan, how to use your time effectively. We'll also go through the planning process live, which will be really helpful for you as you progress into your mock exams. And then we have the revision masterclass right at the end, which looks at everything you've covered. It gives you a refresher on everything you've covered over the 6-week period. And that's going to be really useful for giving you those little extra hints and tips to get you the extra marks in the exam. So do head over to the website, www.astranti.com, for more information about those. And I hope to see you again for the next video.